When you hear one of our bands performing in the community, you hear the music. You don't hear a disability. You hear their abilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so really emphasizing that it is about the person and their abilities, not focusing on the disability.
Introducing Checkwriters, a video podcast for people who want to help their employees, colleagues, and organizations flourish and succeed. I'm your host, Dakota Hebert, Chief Marketing Officer at Checkwriters. Along with my co-host, HR Manager Felicia Corbeil, we'll hear from business leaders and pros who share captivating stories from their respective industries. Join us as we uncover their strategies and get unique inspiration for building great processes and experiences at your own organization. Check out and subscribe to Checkwriters on Apple, YouTube, or wherever you listen and watch your favorite shows. Thanks for watching. Are not-for-profits businesses? Not necessarily, since it's not their primary purpose to earn revenue, but they've got many of the same challenges: finding staff aligned with their goals, building and maintaining culture, plus the added challenge of fundraising. Our guest today is Michelle Theroux. She's taken nonprofit operations to the next level by combining strategic business leadership with a mission-driven mentality. Michelle has used her expertise to turn around several struggling organizations, chaired boards in the human service and healthcare worlds, and been honored with BusinessWest's 40 Under 40 and Women of Impact Award. As the current CEO of Berkshire Hills Music Academy, Michelle shares valuable insight on creating culture, maintaining mission, and the art and science of fundraising in this episode of Checkwriters. All right, welcome to another episode of Checkwriters. I'm Dakota Hebert.
Felicia Corbeil.
And this episode is brought to you by, of course, Checkwriters. Our team is obsessed with providing the best payroll and HR experience in the world, and that's why we do this podcast. We meet our clients, our partners, leaders in their respective industries, and that's who we have today, Michelle Theroux, a not-for-profit leader, a turnaround artist who has revitalized struggling organizations and currently serves as Executive Director of Berkshire Hills Music Academy, which we're going to call BHMA for the rest, because that's a mouthful, Berkshire Hills Music Academy. So Michelle, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. Berkshire Hills Music Academy, I've always thought it's such a unique organization. First off, it's a stunning campus, steeped in history. Can you set the stage of Berkshire Hills, or BHMA for short, and just the location, the history of the property?
Sure. So we are located on a 40-acre parcel in South Hadley, right across from the Orchards Golf Club, if folks are familiar with that. We have been there for just shy of 25 years. In fact, BHMA is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. But the campus itself used to be the private home of the Skinner family, which was a local industrial, silk and textiles was their industry. And we were their summer home. And when the last living Skinner passed away, the property went to Mount Holyoke. And then in 1999, Mount Holyoke was looking to get rid of a few of their properties, including ours on Woodbridge Street, and our founders at that time were looking for a location for what would become Berkshire Hills Music Academy, aka BHMA. And so we opened our doors to the first class in 2001. And so we've been there ever since, expanding onto our campus over the past few years. And we provide residential and day services for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Mm-hmm. So what's it like for your staff and students to work in a beautiful, I imagine that part of the draw of people going there is the location, the convenience, and of course, being this beautiful campus.
Yeah, absolutely. For our residents, it provides them a college-like atmosphere that is very unique to working with individuals with disabilities. A lot of times it's a day program or a separate residence in a group home. This, we have a dorm setting. We have full programming on campus, so they get to experience what their peers or siblings are experiencing when they go away to school. It just has a sort of a more warm and inviting component to the campus. And for staff, we create that culture for staff to keep it to be warm, not sterile or institutional, but home. Take advantage of our property, the grounds, go for walks. We have different athletic fields and things like that for folks to enjoy.
What age of students do you have?
Everyone's 18 or over, and the average age is around 24 or so when folks come to us. It depends.
Is there a maximum age limit?
We don't have a ceiling, and we will have folks part of our community as long as they are appropriate. So they meet our admissions criteria and they continue to stay within that path. Some folks obviously choose to move on either because of funding or they live far away and the family wants them just to have that experience for a few years, and then they'll go back home after our 2-year program. But we have multiple programs and components within our curriculum, so folks can stay varying lengths of time and stay. They don't have to be 2 years and gone or based off of age.
So can you tell us a little bit about the curriculum? Because that's one of the things that makes your organization so unique. And I remember when I visited there is a great feeling at BMHA, and it's palpable. It's a happiness through music. Actually, I remember I was walking through the halls and a student just said, "Oh, I would like to play the piano for you," right there in the hallway. So we sat right down, and it was impressive. But the music, of course, is impressive, but the attitude and kind of that like generosity that they had, and even the excitement to share the musical experience. So tell us a little bit about that, why BHMA is so unique among human service organizations.
Sure, and thank you for sharing your experience, because that's a common occurrence that doesn't happen in other places outside of BHMA. And BHMA is really unique, not only locally here in Western Massachusetts, but also we are the first of the kind in the country to really weave music as a therapeutic modality, as well as fostering the musicality of adults with disabilities to promote their strength. So folks don't have to be musical to come to us, but if you are musical, we are the place for you, because we do act as your promoter. We provide lessons. You can find our performers' music on iTunes, Spotify. They have, when CDs were a thing, they would make their own CDs or our troop CDs. And how that becomes relevant is that music and musicality is independent of someone's IQ. So they have an intellectual disability, fine, autism, Down syndrome, Williams syndrome, and that impairs and compromises some of their functioning. However, that does not necessarily mean that it compromises musicality. And so we have some folks who are brilliant piano players and can hear a piece and sit down at the piano and play it, yet then need reminders on getting through some of their hygiene and brushing their teeth and doing that kind of thing. So the brain is fascinating. And that was really the impetus behind making BHMA what it is, in terms of really being a strength-based focus, not only on music. Now we've expanded into some of the other arts, dance movement, as well as some of the visual arts, but really capitalizing on the strengths of the individuals we serve.
What are some of the other components of the curriculum?
So in addition to the art-based, we do life skills, which focuses on money management, for example, and how to save money, how to bank, and how to shop, how to put your needs versus your wants when you're at the grocery store. I always say you need to get your toothpaste.
Everybody needs that. Right? Everybody needs that class.
100%. And we have, when we do tours, a lot of times families or even other people are like, can I borrow that for the person not interested in BHB? Because it is a life skill of just how to budget, how to do that. We provide cooking. We have an old school sort of home ec classroom, if you will, that has just 6 independent cooking stations. And so we teach everything around nutrition and basic cooking skills. We teach social skills, how to interact. So when we do have a visitor on campus, how to say hello, introduce yourself. When you're in the community or you're getting ready for working in the community, how do you have those social skills at the ready? Or we have a whole residential component that does a lot of recreation and leisure, and we partner with local schools and colleges. We're part of Best Buddies. We're part of Special Olympics. So we try to be as well-rounded as we possibly can, not only focusing in on the music, certainly as foundational, but then life skills, getting our individuals ready to work in the community, be it music-based or not, and then also just gaining better independent skills so they can be as independent, and whatever independent means for them. So for some folks, they're living in an apartment by themselves or perhaps with a roommate. Others are still with us in a group home or a shared living setting. So really it's as individualized as it can be for that person and whatever their direction for their life.
It's great that the program, as you said, takes something that they can be great at, which other organizations might not necessarily. And of course, in everyday life, a lot of the focus is going to be on their disability. Mm-hmm. But when they're there, it's on their strength. You guys can develop that.
Yeah, and we have a saying, especially for our musicians, that when you hear one of our bands performing in the community, you hear the music. You don't hear a disability. You hear their abilities. Mm-hmm. And so really emphasizing that it is about the person and their abilities, not focusing on the disability. We all have things we're good at, and we have things that we're not so great at. And that's just one of those life lessons we continue to iterate and hopefully move the needle within the community and people's perception of folks with disabilities.
I also thought you pointed out that success for each of those individuals is going to be different. So for some, it's going to be, sure, maybe they can live in an apartment on their own or with a roommate. But for some, it's just the fact that they were able to get out in public and perform, or all those different things for different people. The success is different. And so it's not you have to do this to be able to graduate, or you have to do this before you can leave.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's really customized, and it's meant to be very adult, right? So as high school has its standards and everything else, and this is really meant to be, what do you want out of your life? And focusing on that for that person and creating goals and benchmarks for their goals.
So one thing that I thought was really remarkable was when you came on board as the executive director, which you said was 11 years ago now, right? You were the 8th executive director in 13 years. So there was a lot of turnover, a lot of things going on. So how did you feel going into this role when you first started it 11 years ago, knowing that there was that high turnover for this specific position?
So I didn't know it at the time. I said yes.
That's fair. That's fair.
I didn't know that at the time. I knew that there had been some turnover and the why behind it. And I had worked with and I had multiple conversations with the recruiter that they were using to conduct the search. And I figured I had been an executive director before. I had worked with boards before. I came to it with a bit of experience. I know the Pioneer Valley and the Human Service Network here. And so I said, why not? What's the worst that could happen? I become number 9. And so, sure, I also saw a lot of opportunity, right? Because there were so many starts and stops to plans when you have that just churn of leadership. And other positions also had a level of churn. And I'm a little bit of a determined person and sat with the board, worked through that. The board had made some decisions and changes on its own to help create a different path for the new ED, me. And then really just honing in and checking off one thing at a time, creating a lot of systems and structures, and just also having an awareness that a lot of the staff who had been there through multiple transitions probably didn't listen real wholeheartedly to anything I was saying because they weren't sure I was going to be there 6 months later. Mm-hmm. Once I was there for a little bit of time, or they felt comfortable with my leadership style, we were able to really affect some change and growth.
Yeah. And so what were some of those changes that you kind of put in place right away?
So I'm a process and policy person. So there was a lot of updating to processes, and this not making it about the person, but making it about just really systematizing a lot of things, our handbooks, our payroll system, our, hello, Checkwriters, just making sure that there were, we were compliant with HR stuff. We were compliant with just business, and then really looking at staff and where were our strengths, where were our weaknesses, hiring accordingly, working with the board to make sure we had a complement of community professionals, what was missing there, and then doing some recruiting to manage that, and then getting our numbers up, solidifying our contracts. We are state funded. At the time, we weren't as heavily state funded as we are now, but the majority of contracts right now come from the Department of Developmental Services for us. So it was really just working through a lot of those. It's somewhat basic, but very important components to running an organization.
Yeah. And you also mentioned that a lot of the staff who'd been there for a while, you were nervous that they would not take you too seriously, having in 6 months you might be gone kind of thing. So how did you get their buy-in? Because that's, of course, very important.
I was honest with them, saying I have no plans of going anywhere, and saying that I was working with the board and bringing them into some of the conversations, and also hearing, why did they stay? So if you're an employee at a place and you're not sure who your leader is going to be from a day to day because your history of turn is such. So just listening to them, and the common theme was how deeply committed they were to the mission and the work that was being done. We can build on that. Everything else is just noise. But if we have committed, dedicated staff who want to continue and grow with this organization, that's all you need. I can teach anybody anything else around how to read a budget or a spreadsheet. Mm-hmm. Like, that can come. You can't teach work ethic, you can't teach personality or passion. And so if you've got those in a person, then you've got a team.
Yeah.
How do you continue to maintain that? Because 11 years ago, you've obviously had some turnover and hired more staff. What do you do to maintain that awesome culture that was there when you arrived?
It takes work. And it's also setting a standard. That is what we want here. That is the type of employee, and that is the type of workplace we want. And that's the type of service we want to provide. So it's a lot of communication. It's a lot of difficult conversations too, because if somebody isn't meeting that measure, either we counsel them to stay and how they can attain it, or sometimes it's counseling them out because we're just not a right fit. And that's okay. It's not like bad, again, making about process and policy, not necessarily about the person, because not every place is appropriate for everybody. And that happens even on our residents who are living with us. Like, these are the standards we have. And some of it just comes over time, and it hasn't been a smooth 11 years. There's been, like anything, right, ups and downs. Managing a residential program during the pandemic and all of that has always been something I never thought I would be dealing with, kind of a thing, when the layout, everything that happened around COVID, for example.
You talked about having to do things on the business aspect of reorganizing and changing some things when you first started. Was there anything that you had to change or felt needed change on the school side and in terms of the students day to day when you started?
Oh, absolutely. We peeled back every onion, and the layers and layers of making sure staff were well trained, to enhancing some of our curriculum, adding to our curriculum, and then adding numbers of students so we could have a little bit of a more diverse community. It's interesting to look back at your questions, like, because you're so in it that you forget, like, oh, wait, day one was this. But we did, to make sure that we want to make sure our program is solid and it's based off of some research and it's based off of data. And so it's putting in outcomes. So we're measuring somebody not just because they tell us that they like the program, that they are actually benchmarking against their skills, against their goals, so that we can say to the families, to funders, here's our success. People are getting jobs, they're getting work, they're meeting their goals.
Yeah.
Michelle, let's talk a little bit about fundraising, because I always think that must require like a deft talent, because it's of course asking for money in your
Should be.
capacity. And what was it like when you first took on that responsibility? Talk a little bit about some of the obstacles. Do you find you have to do that a lot for BHMA?
I do, and I have a background in fundraising, so I have my certificate from BU in fundraising. So
Oh.
I'm one of those odd people who don't mind asking people for money.
I would think that needs to be a hallmark of the position. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's an art and science to fundraising, right? People think, oh, you just ask people over and over for money. No, because as you both know, if you just continue to ask people for money, eventually you get to know and know. And the why behind people giving. So certainly BHMA had actually a really great history of fundraising. Our founders were very well focused and successful in some of the early fundraising initiatives to raise money to buy the property that we were in, as well as to seed money, if you will, for the early years and expenses of getting BHMA up and going and off the ground. And our history of fundraising at BHMA is really building on off those initial years. We still have donors from the very beginning, from 25 years, who really are committed, again, to the mission. For us, we do an annual appeal. Maybe twice a year, we'll do an appeal, a letter, or some communication out to our donor base, our community. We do an annual gala that's on campus in September. This year, it is the 21st night of September. And because it is our silver anniversary, we're doing a little Earth, Wind, Fire, silver, sparkle, disco, something.
Very nice.
Pretty good.
We should make sure
we'll
we go. Yeah.
I think we...
Sponsored. Checkwriters has sponsored. And so,
Congratulations on the
thank you.
25th anniversary, by the way. That's a pretty big milestone for the school.
Yeah. We're actually doing a beer launch tomorrow evening with Vanish Valley Brewing, and they've done a commemorative beer for us.
Wow. That's
So
nice,
they're going to do proceeds of the sale of that to us the can is wrapped. And so we're trying to be a little bit more creative because it is a milestone year for us to take advantage of. And then we'll be honoring our founders with another event in the fall in Boston. Again, to just pay tribute to what their vision was and over the years what the reality has turned into.
And they're still heavily involved with the school.
Many of them are. Many of them are in various forms or fashions. A lot have been on the board and then have turned off the board or have served on committees off and on. Some still have their loved ones with us. Their son or daughters are with us. So that's a really nice connection when we talk about institutional history and the why behind us being the organization we are. And they can talk around about those early conversations around kitchen tables and the what ifs and how do we make this happen, to really seeing their campus evolve and programming evolve into what it is today.
How many founders are there? Was it two different families, three different families?
So we have 5 that were very active, usually moms, actually, families, because They came behind it with one sort of we call the matriarch, who really was the ringleader and pushed everything to continue to stay on the track and meet milestones, and also do a lot of the fundraising for the $1 million to buy the property back in '99, and then continue to get things going.
Sounds like you've been pretty well funded throughout the history of the school. Have there ever been any challenges when it's like, all right, we really have to hit certain numbers this year, or there haven't been too many of those?
No, there's like anything, right? Even though we're a not-for-profit, there still are challenges, unexpected expenses that come up. We did a capital campaign for our new building. So we're very fiscally conservative, which I think has bode well for us over the years, especially like during the early days of COVID, for example, when we weren't sure what we were going to do, if we could bill because we went remote, all those. So there's certainly been some hiccups over the years, but we are in a very financially solid position, which I'm obviously grateful for, because it's certainly harder to do the operations if you are working from a negative or a deficiting budget. But there's volatility in our funding for sure. Between our state funding, we're going into an interesting economic time. Donors ebb and flow based off of their interests and desires, so it's always constant to keep that up. We do have school districts and again, school districts funding is getting to be interesting. It's just making it all work and trying to figure out, but certainly also, like anything, that's the revenue side, keeping an eye on expenses to make sure that we don't become too lazy or less diligent.
What is the art and science of raising money, just generally, not even specifically for BHMA?
So the science behind it is really looking at data and people's history of giving. So for example, some people might give every September to our event, but will not give to the annual appeal. Interesting, right? So it's looking at the data points. Some people increase their gift every year. Then it's having conversation. That's where the art comes in, is understanding donors, what their capacity might be, what their interest might be. So somebody might have capacity, but BHMA just doesn't pull on their heartstrings. It might be cancer research, and that's where they're going to do a major gift if they're going to make one. Some companies have policies against where they are allowed to give. Perhaps they only give to capital campaigns, naming of a room or something like that, but not to annual appeals or to sponsorships of certain types of events. So it's understanding all those dynamics. And then again, part of it is appealing to people's heartstrings so you can get to the purse strings, and just knowing your donors, getting to be relationship based. Rarely does somebody just write a check because they thought it was a good idea, right? I have a friend who's doing the Pan Am Challenge. I wouldn't have donated to Pan Am if she didn't reach out to me. You do it because of the relationship.
Yeah, talk a little bit about because you obviously serve on some boards as well. And how do
few.
Yeah,
Quite a few.
and how do the relationships you build there translate? Because like you just mentioned, I imagine that's a huge piece of fundraising. And if somebody says, not necessarily, maybe they don't even know about BHMA, but they know of you.
Yep, and that's part of the role of being the CEO in the community too, is that when you are raising money, and I think this was one of the earlier issues with BHMA and such turnover, is people don't know who you are. And so you're not going to give to an organization that you don't know nothing about, or with such turn leadership, you're nervous about its stability. Having a leader, a CEO, or even executive leadership, it doesn't have to be the CEO, it can certainly be vice presidents or whoever, sit in various boards within the community. It just spreads the tentacles out of people who know and understand what BHMA's work is, as well as provide to that board some knowledge, some talent, perhaps some treasure, and to really focus on that. But getting people to understand what the work is, there's also a lot of collaboration that can happen from the healthcare side to the human service side. We're all in the same geographic area for the most part. So how can we build relationships? We're all working, for example, workforce is a huge issue. What are some creative things that we're doing to make sure we are recruiting and retaining quality employees? It doesn't have to be so industry specific. So there's shared learning there.
If I was a huge donor, which I'm not, but if I
Let's pretend.
I'm just curious, what would the pitch be if they said, "Hey, Michelle, we've got this person who they've got money to spend, and we want you to talk to them about BHMA, but you've only got a couple minutes."
So I would find out what appeals to them about BHMA and really the why behind their interest in giving, and then what they would like to do with that gift. So if they are interested because they have a son or daughter with autism, okay, let's talk about that and how we affect change for adults with autism. And then if the size of the gift might be they underwrite part of our programming, or we create a new program, or there's naming opportunities, or again, the size of gift matters. But then to the point of what you can do with it. And if somebody truly, some of the times the best gifts are the small gifts, because it's how much that person can afford. We just did a day of giving back in March, launching our anniversary year. And some of our residents donated $20, $25. We did the 25 play on 25.
Mm-hmm.
That to me was as meaningful, if not more impactful, than somebody who donated 500, because I know that it came directly from that person and their intention and their heart and their desire to want to give. And that's the balance to also make sure people want to give. Let's provide them vehicles and opportunity to do. And you can give time. That's not, people think, oh, if I'm involved, I have to write a big check. No, attend an event, come to a concert. For us, is about growing our community. And the dollars will then follow is how I believe that to happen.
Speaking of you being on many boards, I just want to know, how do you do it all? It's a lot. Running a school, obviously doing all of this fundraising, and then all of these boards and these community initiatives that you're involved in. How do you do it? And what's your drive to do all of those things?
So I have seemingly good time management skills to just...
I would say they're very good. Yes.
Does a lot of-
You were early today, so that was good. Or maybe even right on time.
Oh, yeah. No, I hate being late. So I probably was in the parking lot pacing for 5 minutes. So yeah, I think it's time management, but also I like being involved. I think I have some information and knowledge to share, and I like the idea of making my community a better place. So whatever that looks like for BHMA and for the much larger community. And it's this odd dynamic that happens is when you land on one board and you're a decent board member, you get invited to be on other boards. Mm-hmm. And I always say, by being on a board, it makes me a better executive director or CEO, because I know what my board is looking for, because I can, and vice versa. So when I'm on a board, I understand the role of the CEO of that organization. So I can balance that I'm staying in a government. I'm not there to manage the people. That's their job. I'm there to provide some governance support and what that looks and feels like for each organization. So I think there's a lot of interplay that happens.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background, about what gives you that drive to be so involved in the community, and maybe even growing up, upbringing, did have any play into that at all?
It could. I grew up in the same town I am now working in and living in, came back. Dakota knows that feeling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so we happen to live in the same town. Mm-hmm. And there is really a component of making sure that those values resonate throughout and stay there. It's a very special place. I don't know. My mom was involved in a lot of things. I think it was just that expectation that you're involved. And so it just has grown and developed. And I probably am at my limit, to your point, around what I can actually hold and continue to bear. And not everything has weekly or a monthly cadence of meetings, but certainly managing when they do fit in.
And what about being at a school focused on music and the arts? Do you have a background in music or an instrument or the arts at all?
I grew up as a dancer. So I grew up taking dance, then teaching dance. Then I was on tour for a few years when I was in college. I think that also helped me when I initially landed at BHMA, that I could at least have a little bit of street cred, if you will, with our department of our music and dance department, so that I knew what it was like to perform in front of people. I knew what it was like to load in equipment, and behind the spreadsheet, there was an actual person who's done some of that work.
That's cool, because that's like a good trope, is the CEO or the president of an organization getting down in the weeds of some of the things. Do you load the truck ever when they're going off performance?
I've called the speaker or two, and then my staff look at me and I need to put it down.
Yeah.
But they're like, oh God, she's doing my job.
Michelle, put that speaker down.
Yeah. The last thing they want me is actually pretending to be a musician.
Are there any dance programs at BHMI?
We do have a full dance program. We even have a dance ensemble that performs out in the community along with our band. That has grown over the years from just being an additional piece to really being a major component to our offerings.
And do you teach those classes?
I do not. I've covered once. I covered once again. The last thing people want is, I change the dynamic when I'm in the room. Our students don't necessarily want to take dance from Michelle. They don't see that version of me. Mm-hmm. I'd be happy to, but I think, they're better served by other staff to do that.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how you said staying in the same community that you grew up in and now you currently live in. Just because for myself, having been a teacher, I taught in the same district that I went to school in. And I did the same thing when I first started teaching is I took on all of the projects. And for me, it was so meaningful because it was like, these are the people that were part of my educational life. And this was the school that I went to. And so it was always such a nice point for me to be able to tell the kids like, yeah, when I went to this event at your age. So I think there's so much value in that and staying in your own community. But there's so many people out there who want people to see the world and do all of these things. But I can really appreciate staying in your own community.
Yeah, there's something special about that. And if people choose to go elsewhere, then that's fine too. There's something about, keeping your roots.
Yeah. I can appreciate that. So of all of the projects that you're either currently involved in or were involved in, which one's kind of your favorite one that you've tackled so far?
It's like picking my children.
We've had other people say that.
Because
And they've said, you know what? I do have a favorite child.
well, I think certainly whatever I'm involved with at the time, I'm giving it my all. I'm giving it my best. Currently, I'm serving on the board as chair of a local health center, medical center, and that comes with a seat at its regional, so it's like a 2-for-1 deal. And it's fascinating to me. My background is also in behavioral health, and I have on the outskirts of healthcare, but it's such an interesting time to be in healthcare. So I learn a ton about what is going on the hospitals, with physicians, with recruitment of nurses, to insurance and everything else. So it's just it's a fascinating role to have and to be a part of. So that's certainly a great thing. And then years ago, a friend of mine whose son was diagnosed with cancer at age 10, she started a nonprofit. And so we started helping her getting the wheels going. So to me, that is probably like the most intimate of a relationship I've had with a board, because here was somebody I knew, their child I knew, like, how do we raise money? How do we do this? And thankfully I think he's 26 now and doing well. And
that was going to be my next question. It's always so sad, like whenever I see or hear about things like that, and then I need to know what happened.
So this is one of those wonderful, great stories.
Oh, good.
And everything's moved forward. But that was one of those experiences that it was much closer personally than a professional relationship.
So, Michelle, you were talking a little bit too about what makes a good board member. So what are some of the best connections or in specific examples of being on a board? You got one with that anecdote a little bit there, but what are some others?
Qualities of a board member: showing up. And obviously it sounds so simple, but it's also not just showing up for meetings, but being engaged, showing up for the fundraisers. I mean, that is part of it, or whatever events we're having to support the organization. I think it's important for not just the CEO to know its board members, but at least senior leadership. So your vice presidents, your directors, and other staff to have that relationship with the individuals who provide the governance opportunities. They're my supervisor, as CEO, they're who I report to. So I think it's important, just chain of command even, for folks to know like how boards are structured within nonprofits. Mm-hmm. And then it's what can you provide as a board member to the organization? So sometimes people are tapped for their professional expertise, HR, or they're an attorney or something like that. And so how can that be helpful? And then it's just being active and part of it. An element is keeping confidentiality, because what's discussed sometimes in the board meetings are really about things that can't be necessarily shared publicly. So it's keeping that. Yeah, and being dedicated. It's almost the same characteristics that you would hire in a staff person. Mm-hmm. Somebody who's engaged, cares about their work, wants to be there, and then certainly has a connection to the mission. I think that's the other piece where, especially here in the Pioneer Valley in Western Massachusetts, at least a third of the workforce is based in a nonprofit or human service sector. And then when you add education, higher ed, and healthcare, it's far and above half of, businesses and the employment base. So when you think about it, there's plenty of opportunity for folks to be on boards if they so choose. It's just finding a match, because why would you want to give up your time outside of work to an organization if you didn't really feel compelled by its mission?
What are some of the moments in your work? We keep switching back. You're executive director and then you're a board member. But when you talk about mission and you are at BHMA, what are some of the specific examples or stories you could give us where you think, this is really what this organization is about?
I love that question. Years ago, one of my favorite examples, because it sounds so simple, is we had a young man join us who came in with a lot of facial hair, a beard, if you will. And his mom said, oh, we struggle this and that. And we're like, we'll figure it out. And we ended up getting him in a couple of months to shave. And she was stunned. I never thought he would have a shaved face. Like, she never thought he could do it. And then he would always have the sensory thing when they would take him to a barber to do it. And so we were like, no, you just work through it. And it was just her joy of him having something you probably just take for granted every morning or every other morning.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a dig.
That's funny.
Sorry. But that type of thing. And then each year we have a graduation. So we have a 2-year, the initial core of our program is a 2-year transition program. And so after that, we have a graduation for our folks. And they make speeches. And really the resonating message behind that is what BHMA has meant for them over the past 2 years. And the stories come from them. And they are as simple as, I really loved working with this particular staff person. They helped me with. And it's everything from very simple learning how to do something to getting a job and their first paycheck and what that means. Because it's not about the money for them with a paycheck. For some it is. But for most, it's about the pride and getting acknowledged for work. So our musicians, when they go out, they get paid because there's value in their talent and there's value in their time and what they donate to or what they give to a work site. And so hearing those stories really do fill the cup. And that saying is so popular these days. It really does help us when the days are difficult, when things aren't always as smooth, get through and keep at the forefront the why that staff are at BHMA. They can work elsewhere. 100% they can. I've got great staff. So how do we keep them there? It's those sort of mini milestones as well as the big milestones that help that.
Yeah, that's a great anecdote. So at what event do you have everybody, the students come up and talk about
Our
the differences
graduation.
of the graduation? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's a very exciting event. So when you have that event, is it on campus?
It's on
is
campus.
it like?
It's a tented event in back. We have a keynote speaker. We do an award, what we call our Visionary Award, which is to honor somebody who's made a difference in the field for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, particularly. Probably about 200 people, 250 will show up to support the graduates, and it's friends, it's family. It's meant to be a graduation, which is a celebratory time. It just has a little extra layer of BHMA, if you will, added to it. But our graduates are in caps and gowns, pomp and circumstance, all the graduation fixings, if you will. And then the highlight for everybody. Nobody wants to hear me talk at graduation. I say my hello, how are you? And I introduce them because it really is about the graduates and it really is about their moment. And they take full advantage of it.
That's why you've been there for 11 years, because you give such short intros at the graduation. We're not letting Michelle go.
God forbid somebody's going to come on long-winded. No,
Right,
no.
yeah.
How many graduates do you have this year?
This year we have 6, and our classes ebb and flow each year. I think last year we had 14. So based off of, I've seen a preview of their speeches. They're going to be spectacular. There's rarely a dry eye in the house when our graduates are done.
Yeah, that must be so nice to have those smaller classes where each person really gets their chance to shine and give their why, as you explained.
Yeah. And of course, there'll be BHMA music. Our musicians will be performing during the ceremony, and then we have a reception after that one of our ensembles will be performing at as well.
That's great. Yeah. So I love your anecdote about how it ties into the mission statement and how BHMA is really highlighting what the students can be great at, because that's not something that they often get. But at BHMA, they can feel like, wow, I'm like a star at something. It's better than a lot of like people without disabilities, actually.
It's 100%. Yeah, no, and even ongoingly, every Friday, most Fridays at 2:00, we have what we call Variety Hour, and it's an ongoing concert, if you will. So our students perform pieces that they're working on. So it can be a dance piece, it can be a solo performance, it can be just piano, it can be one of the bands, and they're all in rotation. And it really is a nice way to end our week because you get to hear, again, the mission in action with the music being provided. Some are more complete pieces, some are a little still works in progress, but it really is a great way to end your week.
And everyone gives feedback? The students give feedback to each other?
We have.
Do they have a relationship like that?
They do, and we've built in some of those components so that it is a sort of a learning experience as well. We have MCs, so it's student-led in terms of MCs and narrating the performances. but they're about a half hour to 45 minutes, depending on who's performing, and they're open to the public. So if either of you are in the area and want to come in on a Friday at 2, you are more than welcome. And it is, like I said, a great way not only to end the week, but it also gives our folks opportunities to perform and practice performing in front of an audience. There's no more supportive audience than the BHMA audience in terms of being there to cheer on your. It's not easy getting in front of 100 people and performing or speaking if you're not used to it. And so really it's just.
That's great. So that's really something that reinforces your mission for the students and the team, because the team participates also.
Yep, absolutely. And our community. Parents see it. Parents see what not only their loved one is doing in terms of class and their lessons, but also how our community comes together to wrap around somebody to support them when they're going, or if somebody forgets the words, right? Our students are the first ones to be like, you've got this, you can do this, just start again. Versus, I think, to your point, other adults would be like, oh, can you believe this? Rah, rah, rah. No, that's not the culture. That's not how we support each other.
That's great. Wonderful insight from the leadership and mission of the nonprofit world. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us on Checkwriters and for being such a devoted community leader. This has been a great conversation. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Checkwriters. Be sure to follow us on Apple, YouTube, or wherever you view your favorite podcasts. Stay tuned for future episodes where we'll continue to uncover the secrets behind successful organizations.